Omega Coding welcomes you to its 5th React lesson. In fact, there is nothing difficult in web developing and developing in general, and I can prove it to you. Today, I will view you the React functional components and other possibilities. To begin with, there are two types of components, functional and the class-based components. Till now, we've been mainly using the class-based components, as you can see it here, even though we used a little example of the functional component. So, today we will talk more about the difference between the class-based component and the functional ones, and we will give some examples about it. The functional component has an arrow function style, and unlike the class-based components, the functional ones are stateless. Here, we can declare a state or initialize or do any possible process with the states. Also, I want you to know that the functional component works way faster than the class-based component. However, what you want to know that the functional component is like more properties restricted than the class-based ones. As you can see here, we don't have any rendering, and therefore we have to write return here, and in case it is a one string answer, then there is no need to write the return. You can use the following syntax. Also, the ES6 allows us to remove the parentheses and the return as well. It will perform the function perfectly. A functional component has to be written in an arrow function style. Here the brackets are opened, and they are closed again. Here, after the return, parentheses are opened and they are closed again with the parentheses, just like that. And we can see it here. That's it. Everything works really perfectly. I want you to pay attention that the written value in the return must be in only one general component. In other words, we can't have many divs at the same level. As I said, we should have only one div in which anything could be inserted. It is not necessary to be div, it can also be any possible container. In case you're a beginner developer, I strongly recommend you, while creating functional component, just to stay away from the difficult way of writing, like the extents and other frequent mistakes. In other words, it is simple and it has a more simple style. As I mentioned before, that we can't use the state idea with the functional component. However, thanks to Redux, we will be able on maintaining the state in the future at a global level. Nevertheless, we can't use in the functional component the lifecycle methods of the component, like should come update, component with receiver props, component with update, component did update, component did mount, component with mount, etc. So, now let us finally create a new functional component and see what changes are going on. Now, in our file, functional C, I add import React. Here I want you to know that we don't need to include the component because we will now be using it. So we write directly from React between the quotations. After that, then I attribute it to the variable where it will receive the props as an argument. Now, as I said before, because we don't have the rendering, so we write again return, and we open the parentheses, and we imply in the div test, let's suppose. Now, through the console, we can copy the props. And finally, we export again default. Now, always bear in mind that the components, whether they are functional or class-based components, have to always start with a capital letter. Now, let's see here when we export without default. The difference lies in that here we don't need to mention the variable we want, rather we should write the component's name. The following way of writing allows us to insert two components into one file and export it the same way. Now here, let's suppose it is my functional component 1, and here we export it. Now here we have to import it again. We open the curly brackets, my functional component 1. Then we close the brackets again. And let us change here for a little. We call it component 1, and here it is component 2. So here we insert the two components in the return, my functional component 1. Okay. And now let's see how does it work. Here it is. Our contents, component 1 and component 2. Now let us create an object here. So we write const obj1 equals, again we open our lovely curly brackets, type, in the quotation we write infinity. And now let's move the object to any of our components. Let's suppose to that. Now we name the props, for example vary1 equals, here we open the brackets, obj1, and therefore here we copy the process in the component. Again we open the brackets and we write props vary1, as we mentioned there, plus, and we add the same thing but this time with the model. Now let's see here. Here we have infinity fx35. It is all working. Okay, now let's optimize our code for a little. Here we declare const, let's suppose p1 equals props dot vary1. Here we write p1 dot type, and the same thing here, p1 dot model. Now let's open. Now we can see it all works the same way. Okay, now let's move on and talk more about the styling. CSS problems appear like the fact that CSS variables are global. Every written code by each developer compared with another developer's code can create a conflict of variables. Most of the time it will be required to use the importance, which I don't really advise you to use them. Instead, I recommend you to use the efforted library, which has many other advantages. We will see efforted. Now that's efforted, the GitHub page. In fact, the efforted page works both with and without the React. Now let's insert efforted into our application by writing here npm I save efforted. Okay, and here it is imported now, and let us import the efforted function in the app.js. Effort import css from. Now let us create a new JavaScript file, and we call it app styles, which will be responsible for the styling, and here we import again style sheet from Aphrodite, and we export it as well. Export default, and here we create a container. Now we write background color, let's suppose AB. Here, in case you have the background image property, then you need to write it with the camel case and not with the dash. Now let's leave it just background, and then we go back to ReactJS and we create a new div in which there will be a proper text, and we go to see our application. You see here we have the text. It appears here. And now let's inspect here. Now we can see the property and the value of the CSS. Everything works amazingly here. Now let us learn the most important aspect of the Aphrodite. Here we open a new JavaScript file, and let us suppose that I want to use the same square with the same parameters in many places, which color will be black, and I call the file square styles. Now what I do here is that I export black square, black, and here the width 200 pixels, the height, and the border as well, 3 pixels. Now these are the properties that we want to make them shared and accessible to many places. Now let's create a new div in the app.js, which a class name, let's suppose, is square, so that it will receive the given data. Now I want you to notice that we don't write the square like that. Rather, we write it with the Aphrodite style, which is CSS styles square. Now the given square, which we can't find it anywhere here, we add it in app styles here, opening the brackets, and now we should import like a square from square styles, like a square from square styles. Okay, now we take the black square and insert it in the square object using the spread operator. What the spread operator does is that it takes all the properties here and insert it in the square class. Also, the square is an object that appears in the app.js as a class, as you can see it here. Now let's see how it works. Here you can see our black square. Everything is fine. Okay, and now we can see here these parameters are already given to the square. Let's suppose here we change the width, let's suppose 50 pixels. And here the height as well, again 50 pixels. Now let us see what happens. Okay, here you see it is smaller. Okay, now let's understand the greatest thing about the Aphrodite library. Here, the older width and height were 200 pixels, but by inserting them and reinitializing them, the older width and height are disregarded and the background and the border are left as they are. So that allows us to avoid the important coding repetition and many other problems, not only while creating a React app, but also while creating a simple CSS or HTML pages. And that was our lesson today, and I believe that you can do it.